Hello and welcome to the CSED podcast, a podcast where we talk about teaching computer science with computer science educators. I'm your host, Kristin Stephens-Martinez, an associate professor of the practice at Duke University. Rejoining me today is Dr. Beth Simon, teaching professor in education studies at UC San Diego, formerly teaching professor in computer science engineering. Beth, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Hi, Kristin. Thanks for the invitation and super excited to be sharing my experiences with peer instruction with you and your audience.
So today's episode is a continuation of the Teaching Practice Byte on peer instruction. In the first episode, we talked about what peer instruction is, and Beth was generous enough to agree to record a second where you and I are going to discuss what I do and to coach me through how to make my peer instruction even better. If you don't know what peer instruction is, I strongly encourage you to listen to the episode right before this one in the podcast feed. But otherwise, could you provide a brief, 1 to 2 sentence summary of what peer instruction is to refresh everyone's memories?
Sure. Peer instruction, even though it sounds like a very general technique, is actually a very specific technique by which we implement a flipped classroom. And so generally students prepare outside of class, learn some of the easy things. As an instructor, we create multiple choice questions for students to engage with in the classroom. And each question is engaged with in a specific protocol. You put the question up, you ask students to individually think about it and in some way record their answer. And then you have them discuss that question in groups, talking about both the correct answer and the incorrect answers. And then you ask for everybody to vote again. We sometimes call that the group vote. And then at that point, you can lead a class-wide discussion and clear up any misconceptions that students might have.
Okay. So I think that we can start with me giving you a rundown of how I do it and a little bit of the context. And then you can tell me what I'm doing wrong and help me fix it. So I teach intermediate data science, which is basically it's not just for majors. It's for anyone who's taken the CS2 or someone who's learned Python in our CS1 and taken a stats class. So a lot of different levels of preparation are coming in. And it is a flipped class and also hybrid because I am that kind of crazy. So the students have to watch videos. There's a couple of readings, most of it's videos. And then there are what we call prepare quizzes, where they have to take these quizzes. They get 3 tries. They need 80% to get to full credit. So it's pretty low barrier. It's just to do this thing. And then I actually do just in time, because again, I am that level of extra, where I look at how the students did in the quizzes. And I'm looking at across all of their attempts, what did they do wrong on the first try, second versus third. And I order my peer instructions basically by what they did worst on. So what they did worst is what we talk about first. Cool. And then in that order, and there's often a little bit of a mini lecture after each peer instruction, but kind of all right, you all did worse in understanding about X, Y, and Z. So we're going to do a peer instruction on that first, everybody. So we do that. And then based on how things go, I either quickly go through the mini lecture afterwards, or I go through it in more detail, depending on what wrong answers they chose. My policy is that they need 80% of the possible points across the whole semester to get full credit. I think some students hate that because there are some weeks where there's more peer instructions than other weeks. So I kind of like the idea that you mentioned in the prior episode about going you need a certain number of the submissions each day, and then you get 1 point for that day. I might adopt that to make it so that they're less upset about but there were 8 last week and there are only 3 this week. And I'm well, that's just how it goes sometimes. And then during the peer instruction, I have the students vote individually, and we'll set the hybrid part aside for now. We won't talk about that part. I've recently changed things there that not many of them prefer to attend hybrid. I've clearly signaled hybrid is when you are sick, you're an athlete, and you're traveling. It is not because you don't feel like schlepping to the lecture room. So I have the students fill out Microsoft Forms. So I actually capture their email address so I know who they are, and I can give award points as appropriate. And then if less than 75% get it right, then I have them discuss. But I don't do that if they get over 75%, which rarely happens nowadays because it feels like I've hit the points where the questions are hard enough that they struggle with getting that marker. Um, and then they discuss, and then I do a round 2. Usually I open it within like 30 seconds, 1 minute of having them start discussing, because I usually get up and I wander around the room during the discussion to
Right.
try and get students who are not talking to anyone to either talk to me or talk to their neighbor.
Sure.
Um, and then what I usually do is since I know that 140 filled out round 1, I say like we'll like close out round 2 when 120 fill out round 2. And I open the form right when I use it, and I close the form right when I'm done using it, because it's to prevent the students from, like, filling it out later or something like that. So I'm like, "No," it's like,
Hmm.
right when I'm using it, that's the only chance you get. And then when students complain, I'll be like, "You only need to fill out one of the 2, round 1 or round 2, to have earned the point for that peer instruction." Um, but that then leads to problems with round 2 sometimes. We're like, "Oh, I already did round 1. I like, check out for the rest of this, like, whole thing." Uh,
Yeah.
is that it? Let me think through, is any other pieces to my peer instructions from there. For the distractors, for the wrong answers, I did get feedback this semester where students appreciated when I talked about the wrong answers. Like, if you chose this wrong answer, it could be that you don't understand X, Y, and Z. Um, and they appreciated that, so I started doing that more. Sometimes my wrong answers are they they have a reason there, but they don't have a misconception attached to it. So, like, for example, I have the students apply how the neural net function is working. Like, apply this, like, remember this function, here's the inputs, what's the output? And so all the numbers that are available to them are every possible number that could be involved in this calculation. And so, like, all the input numbers are there, all the weights are there, like, all of those numbers are there. And
Mm.
it's because I'm like, well, I have seen students just like just pick these random numbers that are like visible to them. And so, like, let's see how many of them do that in the end. So then there's like 10 options, which I know is not the best, but it's also one of those things of like, if a student, I want the student to pick an answer and then signal to me like, this is the ones that I'm like, I don't know what's going on, so I'm just going to pick this number.
Mm.
Um, all right. I think that was all. So tell me what I'm doing wrong, Beth.
All right. I have a few things I would
Okay.
comment on. First off, your talk about like, choosing to have a group discussion versus not, based on the 75% mark. So great that you're rarely hitting 75% the first time, because that means you are making the questions hard enough. And so I think that shows expertise on your part. I will say that for anybody else who's looking to pick up peer instruction for the first time, that can be a thing that's very, very hard to do. One of the reasons that I always, two reasons I always say have the group discussion is just because people pick the right answer does not mean that they thought the right
Okay.
things about how to explain that. And we know that students going into industry are often, they say that they're lacking their presentation skills, their communication skills. And I tell students that, we're helping build your communication skills. And this is what employers say they want.
Mm.
So that's why it's really important that you all discuss. The other thing that I think is really valuable, and I've heard from students, and as I start looking into more of the psychological and neuroscience behind this, is students like knowing what's going to happen next,
Okay.
right? So if they're like, if they just know there's always going to be that discussion time, and so they can just turn and ask other, it reduces their stress, and I think
Oh.
allows them then to focus more on their learning. So I think it's important for them psychologically to have that time. It's also much easier as us on instructors. Like, you don't have to do quite as much thinking in the classroom. Just do the discussion. You don't have to be like, do I need to do this? And that's especially important for, I think, beginning faculty who are beginning to discuss. Sorry, group discussion. You said 30 seconds to a minute. For reasons that we don't need to go into, I have spent an obscene amount of time going over my own
Uh-huh.
podcasts, editing them up for purposes that, again, are not important. But I can tell you, I spend more than a minute on discussion. It's probably 2 to 3 minimum
Mhm.
minutes on discussion, but that also depends on like how engaged everyone
Ah,
is in
let
discussion.
me be more precise. I turn on round 2 within, like, 30 seconds or a minute,
Oh,
the form. Like, I open the form because, like,
yeah,
the
yeah,
forms are only open when we're actually using them, and then I shut them down.
right. So you want to give them that opportunity.
But discussion can go for another like 5 minutes. It's just I turn it on
Sure.
so that I turn it on, then I walk away from the podium and I'm walking around the whole room. And then I pop also it up a little bit so that they can I show just the top part so they can see how many people have submitted so far. So they also know that the
Sure.
form is open. Um,
Okay. That makes complete
okay.
sense and sounds like a very good practice. Absolutely. And also the whole walking around the room while they're discussing, even like the craziest thing I ever did is I lectured to 547 students. We have no lecture hall that serves 547 students.
Okay.
I had two 250 person lecture halls side by side, separated by a door, and a room that was on the flat up on the top that had like 20 people. And I was simulcast across, and then I had TAs wandering the aisles with microphones. But anyway, I would go up and down the aisle. I would come in the other thing, and I did get a lot of comments like I was a little bit like Ellen, partially because I have short hair, but also it was like the Oprah walking the
Uh-huh.
aisles. Depending on your age, you can pick your favorite telepost, whatever. But yeah, you do want to walk up and down the aisles, and the students like actually kind of get to know you. If you have a large classroom, I think it's really great to bring undergraduate tutors in to go up and down the aisles and encourage that discussion
Yeah.
and be like, whatever.
I feel like also every school has its own culture, right? And it
True.
feels like at Duke, students I struggle a little bit with the like walking around and talking to students. Um,
Hmm.
and I think it's one of those few things where it feels like the beginning of the semester is so important for setting that tone. And
Yes,
then I
very
never get it
much.
right. And so the rest of the semester, this little piece feels like a dumpster fire. And I'm like, no, we're going to try and get this right this time.
Well, good for you for continuing to try.
And so what it boils down to is I end up wandering around, and this is also just my own introversion, like hating
Yep.
having to walk around and talk to students.
Same here. That's why I hire tutors.
Yeah,
They're much better at it.
my TAs, many of them are not available during class, and
Mm.
they also seem to have strong introverted tendencies at the same time.
Mhm.
So I wander around, I sit down next to someone who's like got nobody near them because they
Mhm.
partially sometimes purposely are sitting so that no one is near them. And then I talk to them. Um, and it feels like I'm not sure how to move past this to try and get them to talk to each other more. Do you have any advice on that one?
I do. And by the way, I am with you. I'm totally introverted. People don't believe it, but it's very true. I only play an extrovert when I stand in front of the lecture hall, but I don't really like that. And I never get to actually have interesting discussions with
Mhm.
students. They're usually like, it's like, is there a midterm in this class? I'm like, that might not be the most interesting thing to ask me right here. But that's why I hire undergraduate tutors to do that. But I really think the big
Mhm.
difference, and I know that hardly any of my colleagues at UCSD do this, is that I assign them into groups. So if you come to the UC San Diego campus and you go into any lecture hall, you're going to find that every seat has a letter number combination on it, just like at the theater. We have A1, A2, A3, A4.
Oh, we don't have that.
I know. Well, they didn't either. And I asked for it in one classroom. And then they're like, why do you want this? And I explained it. And they thought it was really amazing. And then I think there must have been some extra money or something. Anyway, suddenly it was everywhere. And then they also created diagrams of the seating layout and
Mhm.
put them online where all the faculty could access them.
Mhm.
And I literally draw a little circle. I used to like draw little circles around it and make little groups of 3.
Mhm.
And I assign students into there. Now, students will hate this. And I tell them this. I'm like, you are going to think this is the worst thing ever.
Mhm.
I ask you to give me 2 weeks and tell me if you can't stand your group, if you can't stand where you're sitting, if this isn't working for you, you let me know and we'll work something out. Nobody has ever asked
Oh.
to stop doing this. Oh, wait, actually, there was one. There was one person. Anyway, the reason I do this is, again, I was very much not the kind of person who would raise my hand in class, even in a small classroom.
Mhm.
So I wanted to take away the stress
Yeah.
of having to be like, find a group. Can I talk with you? That's not good.
Mhm.
The other thing is I started doing this in a CS1 class, and we all know the issues of lack of females in introductory programming and like feeling like you don't fit in. And I've
Mhm.
had that my entire life.
Mhm.
So I would sort my class roster
Mhm.
by gender
Okay.
So I've got M's and F's. And then because I'm lazy, I would just start assigning the seating that way.
Mm-hmm.
And what that would mean is, so any group, they're all sitting in one spot. No, the first time I did it, I just did 2 men and a woman, or 2 women. If there was going to be a woman in the group, there had to be 2 out of 3. And I still had girls coming to me saying, so-and-so won't listen to me. So-and-so, they've got to whatever. So then I'm like, forget it. It's easier to sort anyway. So I sort and then I do it. And then all the women end up sitting in one spot in the classroom, which I don't know if they've ever noticed. I've only had one student though, like halfway through the term, he's like, did you notice all the girls are sitting up there? I'm like, that's interesting. And then I walked away. But I definitely, I know the girls did notice that they were in groups with girls. I don't know if they noticed they were all sitting in the same area, but I do wonder if that had any influence on their perception of being alone in the class because they're all grouped together.
Yes.
But I absolutely do required seating, would do it even if it wasn't CS1. I might not sort by gender if it was, beyond CS1. I think when I did the CS2, I didn't. Often there's some other things that go around with that. But what I think is really important is I take time and I say, you need to get to know the people in your group because you're going to talk to them all term long. And that also takes away this like putting yourself out there in front of other people, and you're forced to make some friends ish. At least friends for being in the classroom. So I think can be a big lift if you don't have numbered seats. And you do have to explain it to students about this is, we're doing this because I don't want any of you to feel left out. I don't want, I'm doing this for very real reasons. But I think it's a big thing that changes that dynamic of expectation of discussion.
Interesting.
I used to, now here's a step that maybe is not needed in too far. I used to, when I was very worried at the beginning about students actually having equal voice in the group, I would say, here's 3 icons. We're the Triton. So I had a Triton, I had a bug, and I had a Java coffee cup. And I was like, okay, these are the 3 icons, and each lecture period, one icon is going to be selected, and that's the person who's leading the discussion that day. In your group, everybody decide for the whole term, are you the Java cup, are you the Triton, or are you the bug? And I would have that person say, okay, who's the bug? Raise your hand at the beginning of every class. Okay, you guys are leading the discussion today. I stopped doing that.
Okay.
And I think that was maybe a little bit of a step too far, but it was also, again, trying to keep this open level playing field. And I do think that just putting them in assigned groups where they're with the same people solves a lot of the problem that that you are experiencing, trying to feel like I really want them to engage. And they'll engage with each other then, and then you don't have to.
Yeah.
To be honest.
That is, I might go and investigate the room that I will likely be teaching in the fall to see if there's numbers. I don't think there are, but at the same time, it's not that hard to like pull up a grid and go like, there's this many seats across. This is your spot. And yeah, I'll have to think about how to handle that because I suspect that I probably will get somebody who goes like, I don't want to be there. I don't want to like, after 2 weeks, like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. Well, so what I would do is keep the front row. If you've got enough capacity, like don't assign the front row.
Okay.
And save that for people like, you've got a student who's got hearing issues or whatever, and their group gets to move to the front. Or if people are like, well, if you don't want to be in your group, that's fine. But, this is where there are open seats. I don't know about you, but we're pretty much our seating is full up, man. So it's like, if they've got to sit in the front versus discuss in their group. And, somebody comes up, there's this guy in my group. He just never discusses. And I'm like, I appreciate that you're trying and whatever, but don't worry about it. It's not, your problem to deal with. And if they don't want to engage in the learning, that's okay. Are you good with your other partner? Yes. Okay, fine. And I make it groups of 3 to deal with absenteeism and things like that. That way you've always got somebody.
Okay. I'll have to sit with whether or not I want to impose that level of structure. I agree with the idea that it very much reduces a bunch of anxiety by me being the awkward one and going like, I'm going to be the awkward one by forcing you all to sit in certain spaces and telling you got to get to know your part, like the triple that you're in because of education research says so. But I have to think about if I want to like go that far because I don't know. I still have moments of wishing that I could win the popularity contest among the teaching faculty, and I know that I never will, but it's still moments of like, I don't like the fact that my like rate my professor, even though I don't look there very often, is so polar, like bifurcated in like how people perceive me.
Yes, I understand that completely, and think it was like a point in my career. Two things happened that made me really embrace that. So I started teaching in CS1, which is
Mm-hmm.
our majors, right? And then this thing came along where I was asked to prototype the new AP Computer Science
Mm-hmm.
Principles course for high school, which is essentially
Yep.
a CS0. And I was then teaching that to all of the psych majors on campus, which at the time was the
Mm-hmm.
largest major, were required to
Mm-hmm.
take that class. And they previously had been doing like Excel and other boring whatever. And here I'm going to make
Yep.
them program. And so I'm like, and again, also I'm doing this. This is the first quarter where I did this 3-room, 500 and whatever. And I'm like, okay, yes, Beth is doing all the crazy things. So,
Mm-hmm.
we're peas in a pod there. So I hired a bunch of my undergraduates who were in my freshman course the previous year. And I said, I need you all to help me with this because you understand why peer instruction is valuable. And I'm going to have to do this and I need your input on it. And they gave me a variety of important things. They said, first off, you can't make it just be 5% of the grade. It needs to be 10% of the grade because that communicates to the students, this is
Mm-hmm.
important. And I'm like, yeah, but people and whatever. And they're like, you can give exceptions. The student is doing chemotherapy, no problem. They can just get the 5 points. It doesn't matter, or
Yep.
10%. They said, if you don't make it so that you can't get an A without coming to class, then you are not telling, you are failing them by not communicating how important this learning
Oh.
experience is. And you
Mm-hmm.
have the research to show it. And I was like, whoa, the students told
Mm-hmm.
me that. Okay, I will do that. The other thing is they said, yes, you have to have the numbered groups. It's psych major, so they're half women. So we didn't have to do the women
Mm-hmm.
and men thing. But they're like, no, you need to do that. And they're like, and we need to be there. It can't just be you walking up and down. We need to be there. And I would assign one undergraduate tutor to a group of 30 students. I'm like, you own this row, these 3 rows. And I, at one point, I even like left blank rows for them to wander up and down in. And I had them introduce themselves to their group and be like, they're the ones there. The other reason was because we were in the multiple rooms, but when we have students share out, this is something I think more people should do. We had students speak into microphones because they're
Yep.
in multiple rooms. And, lecture halls are set up so that we at the front can project. And it's really hard for the voices in the audience to
Yep.
come through. What was better about the microphones for everyone is now nobody's looking around to be like, who's talking? And looking, and they put a handheld microphone in front of them. I call on that, and I'd be like, group microphone 2, you're on. And they'd flip it on. They go, hello. And they'll be like, hi. And the voice just comes out of everywhere and nobody
Mm-hmm.
turns to look. And so you're like really anonymous. And so now you're not having to scream. You're not having, you're just speaking in your normal voice and you're completely anonymous. And these voices just come out. And I think it was honestly the best peer instruction experience I probably ever offered because, again, I was very much worried about convincing these students it was valuable, et cetera. But that's one of those things that's going to be really a step far for most people to be able to get wireless microphones, available in their classroom to be handing around.
What's nice is I don't actually have to worry about microphones. I do have microphones in most of my rooms that I get assigned. I think and I think one thing that might convince me to do the assigned seats is then I can say group 5 without having to like call out a person's name, which would be great. So do you have any other thoughts about how I do peer instruction to make it better?
No. And to be honest, I think most of the really critical components for really making it work, I would say I would encourage you to reduce those number of options. So the way I think about my misconceptions and like how many other options I have, if it's not interesting to discuss and have an aha moment around a particular misconception, then I don't want it to be
Oh.
there. And that way I can tell students it's important for you to not just discuss every answer option because I'm obviously not going to put this exact same question on an exam, but I might just tweak it so that one of the other answers is right. So that's another way that incentivizes them to discuss it. And then also, really makes it so that I think 3 is actually the perfect number of answers because I've even been in a classroom and I'm like, I don't want it. Like I'm watching a friend of mine or something. I'm like, I don't want to discuss all those other answer options. And then if there's 5 other options, you don't even know which one should we discuss. And so I feel it's a way, again, of guiding the learning and the conversation to include just the ones that are really important to know. And I'll definitely attribute Cynthia Bailey Lee really gave me a lot to think about in this regard, because she started using peer instruction in theory of computation. And so maybe you're studying the halting problem. You have a lot of, halts does not halt, or
Yes.
true or false. And, and I'm like, how can that be good? It's just 50-50. And it's because it's not 50-50. It's about the discussion, the explanation of why it's that and why it's not that. And so I really learned a lot. And her questions are available on our peer instruction, the number 4cs.com website. Look at those theory of computation questions, and you will be blown away.
Awesome. Yeah, I think my voice is really going now to the audience. I have a cold, in case you can't tell. Get to sound funny the whole time. How do you train your TAs to effectively wander around? Though I guess since you are assigning them a set of students, it's probably a lot easier. Do they also have discussion, or back in the day, did they have a discussion that also were teaching those same students or anything like that?
Right. So this is something that maybe is unique to UCSD. I think it's fairly common amongst UCSD. So you have a certain dollar amount of instructional assistant support that you can have. And if you choose to have a TA, they're expensive because you're paying more, and then you're also paying tuition or admission. But if you choose to have undergraduate tutors, and they're much cheaper. And tutoring at the undergraduate level is exceedingly prestigious at our institution, and always has been. So the best students want to do it. I have found I need, with a big class, I need one TA to manage the undergraduates and to manage, high level things, but they may never even come to the classroom. I encourage them to, if they're interested in teaching, to learn about this. So the people I have going around and encouraging discussion are, in fact, undergraduates themselves who have chosen to do this because they learned so much through the peer instruction process. So they are the best sellers of, like students may even ask them, like, why are we doing it? And they'll be like, hey, you don't understand. This is great. This is so much better. I promise you'll never fall asleep in this class. All that sort of thing. So I do believe that the undergraduate tutor model, especially at the lower division level, is really, really helpful for a wide range of things. But motivating the other students is important, and going ahead and pushing them. Some of them are like, I'm kind of introverted too. And I'm like, that's fine. But you just got to pretend for this next 50 minutes that you aren't. That's what we all do. And I'm like, just remember, you got to convince them that this is going to be helpful to them. If they really engage in the classroom, as students have sold me on their evaluations, I didn't even have to study for the exam, cram for the exams, because I already knew the material. I'm like, yes, I won. I bet the one. So that's awesome. It's when students say things like that. The other, here's a bit of advice that might help you with your setting the tone thing. I do ask students, required end of the term, so like for 1 percentage point of the overall course grade, you have to complete a learning reflection, because I'm like, you need to reflect on what are the things that you did in this class that supported your learning, and how did homeworks either work or not work for you, and, help them think about the future. But I asked them to tell me, like, tell me why peer instruction worked for you in the classroom. And then I get quotes from that, and I throw those up. I throw those up not only the first day, I put one up every week. It's that slide that's sitting up at the beginning, and it's what a student said about peer instruction. And I think that is a bigger sell for them than anything I could say. Their fellow students said, like, I didn't even have to cram for the exam. I already knew it by the time I got there. Or I actually met someone in this class, and now, we're taking our classes together and things like that. So having students reflect on their own learning, I think, is something that we often don't think about as computer science instructors, even those of us who care a whole lot about learning. But taking that time at the last class period to have students do that, to share some things out, to come back and be like, hey, let's take a second to think, you did this weird thing with us all quarter long. Why did we do this? And
Mhm.
you'd say that. And the funniest thing, sometimes I just, you don't know what else to do in the last class. So I'm saying that. But our student affairs officer had recently graduated student, and her younger sister was in my class, this psych
Mhm.
majors class. And she told me that her sister was really influenced by that statement in that last class period, because she's like, by that point, she'd really come to believe in you. And she, yeah, this was all good. But then you told her again the research and why and whatever. And she's like, right. I mean, students can really understand it better at that point,
Hmm.
about why it is. And I think, just in general, in terms of helping students be able to go out and become better learners as they leave our classrooms, that's an opportunity that we should be taking more advantage of. And it's important. I think getting to know, we have a cognitive science department in our university, and getting to know some of the faculty there and like looking at the courses they offer, and really gave me more confidence in sort of my responsibility and opportunity to inform students about how they learn, and
Hmm.
share that with them so that they could take that on to other classes.
Is that so? I know you're on the quarter system, so that
Hmm.
means it's much shorter, but
Yes.
I'm on the semester system. So is that something worth doing, like, 2/3 into the semester at all, you think?
I don't know. I think I think maybe I would do it right before like a midterm if I was going to have that to be, or again, maybe it's, I used to do like, I'd throw a graph up from a research paper
Mhm.
again with a quote every week,
Mhm.
just for something. I think that the power of the last lecture is it's over, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, this is what I'm leaving you with. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not just here to teach you data science. I am here to, help you, support you in your ongoing learning. And so I want you to think about how you can take what this you learned in this class and take it on to other classes that don't even use, peer instruction. Like, how do you keep yourself mentally engaged in the class? How do will you actually read before class so that you can be prepared? That's a double-edged sword, because it depends on how the faculty member is lecturing. But people said that they paid more attention. They changed how they were engaging in their other courses based on their experience,
Mm.
in my course.
Interesting. I think some of my teaching has changed over time for partially for the, like, reaction to the pandemic and wanting to
Oh,
provide
yeah.
a bit more flexibility to the students, and some of that, I think everything is a pendulum swing. You're, like,
Hmm.
swinging back and forth trying to get to that, like, good spot, and that spot keeps changing because the world keeps changing too. Um
I have to admit, I haven't taught with peer instruction since the pandemic,
Mhm.
and I've heard it's just even more difficult.
It
And
it does feel more difficult.
it feels, yeah, you could talk to Leo Porter about this, about, again, knowing that this is a best practice and that it is good for students, but needing to provide more flexibility for students and understanding what's going on. There is a very interesting paper about students with ADHD, anxiety disorders, and other things, and their
Mhm.
experience specifically in peer instruction classrooms.
Yeah.
And it, not everyone has the same experience, obviously, and different people have different experiences at different points in their quarter or their lives or whatever. But, some of the students are saying, yes, it makes me anxious to discuss with other people, but then some people are like, but I'm anxious to discuss people. And here's this very narrow little thing, and I'm expected to do it and actually feel better afterwards because
Mhm.
I did whatever. And then I discussed with other people and I realized that I wasn't the only one that was having trouble. And that made me feel better. So it's a range of things, that come out of it. And so it's you know the basic takeaway was there are some good things that come out of it, there's some bad things that come out of it, and we as faculty need to be cognizant of people's
Mhm.
situation and states, and just,
Yeah.
you can't run roughshod and say everyone. If you're like not discussing, then the rest of your group should turn you in because we're going to take away your points. It's like, nope, nope, not like that. um
Yeah.
but I have to admit, I don't know what it really looks like in the classroom
It
post pandemic.
For me, like, one of the things is it's getting students to discuss has felt more like pulling teeth, like, getting them to have some kind of discussion, um, and I part of me can't tell, is it is it me? Was it like me setting the semester tone wrong? Like what is going on? And slowly like trying to get back to what it used to be like. Cause probably the most shocking thing is I could probably go back and actually look at the data. Though like it's biased in that before the pandemic I taught mainly CS1 and after the pandemic I've been
Yeah,
mainly teaching data science, but I feel like the learning gains between round 1 and round 2 are much
because
smaller.
yeah, it used to be pretty big.
It used to be pretty
Like you
big.
said, less than 75% and then above 90.
Yeah, it's like it's always like it's below 75% a lot of the time, but then you always break 75% on the round 2. But like nowadays it feels like it's still less than 75% every time. And I'm like, I don't understand. I
Ooh.
don't understand why you all shifted only like by 5%. Like what does this mean? And so I'm still it's part of me is kind of more willing to maybe I need to be more drastic and just go like, no, assigned seats, assigned groups. We're all just gonna like we're gonna try this experiment. And so I'm like slowly trying to figure out how do I get back to what peer instruction felt like it used to be like.
I don't know, because this, I thought we would have been past this already, but I wonder if it's just a matter of time of,
Mhm.
getting the kids in our classrooms who weren't as impacted, or they had more time to recover their
Mhm.
group learning skills, their social skills, because they've gone now 4 years in high school, all in person and whatever. But
Yeah.
it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. This year we're graduating those who start first year was during the pandemic. So
Right.
their first year of
So I think
college was
there's
in
potentially
pandemic.
even, 3 or 4 more years before
Yeah.
we really come out. If there is any coming out the other side, it's 3 or 4 years away. I would say that if anything, peer instruction implemented the way that we know it should be is still one of those things that could be super beneficial for bringing kids back and for giving them the expectation about collaborating and communicating. And maybe it doesn't happen when they're in your semester, maybe it's the next semester with that next professor implements peer instruction, but it gives them so much more feedback about what works and what doesn't work, and like how to be a student, how to be a professional in doing data science or programming or whatever. And so I think this is a potential hope. I think I at least used to be experienced in seeing like the first 2 to 3 weeks, it was kind of like, oh, no, no, no. But then they came around. They're like, oh, this is great. Like, I see what I'm getting from this. And I think it's just, there's more for them to get past now, and there's less prior experience in the collaborating and whatever coming in um, that we might not individually be seeing it in the time span of our term or semester or whatever. But I do think it's almost like it would be there was a missed opportunity where we could have gone out post pandemic and like had some university president or dean of a school of engineering saying, now is the time that all faculty need to be doing peer instruction because we got to get our kids back.
Your point about developing the skill to explain things, I have not heard it framed that way, but I think I'll definitely be using it. Because, like, in my data science class, one of the things I talk about is communication. Like, the reason why you have this laundry list of terms to learn is because we need to be precise in our communication when it comes to data science, that people understand what you did and your argument for why it's a good idea. Um, I'm going to roll back real quick to your comment about undergraduate tutors. So when I said TAs, it's a overloaded term. It means multiple
Sure.
things. When I said TAs, we have undergrad TAs and we have grad student TAs.
Okay.
And the undergrad TAs, I'm figuring out like how do I train the undergrad TAs to effectively support the discussion of what's going on. Because it very much is like you got to channel your most extroverted person that you possibly can, and then also come up with reasons to go talk to the students.
Can you recruit from your own student body? Like, can you recruit from the
Yeah,
kids from this semester to be your tutors?
I do.
Okay.
I do recruit them. It's a little bit hard because the probably the most difficult thing is I'm kind of the time slot that I normally get for this course is very popular.
Mm.
And so I often have my undergrad TAs say, I can make the Friday session, but not the Wednesday session because I have a Wednesday class during that time. So there's that difficulty as well. And then I have another one who's like always the hybrid one that's in the corner to make sure that the mic is on and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And manning the
Yeah.
Zoom for me. So it's a little
Mhm.
difficult. I think I maybe I'll try this experiment of just doing assigned groups and then see where that goes.
Yeah, I do think in the checklist of things, yeah, assigned groups will be your
Mhm.
biggest win.
Okay. Maybe I've convinced myself that I will try this, but I'm going to sleep on it first.
Well, and to the point of you've got summer, if you can find out what room you're in and discover it doesn't have seat numbers on there, it's not that much money. Like a little grant and be like, hey, peer instruction, best practice, yada yada. This person told me her ed tech people went around and put seat there. It doesn't cost that much to send a guy with a drill and these plates that you can buy on Amazon and drill them into every seat over the
Really?
summer. So consider
Maybe I'll
asking for
try.
it.
Okay.
Consider asking for
I'll
it.
try and figure out
Yeah.
what room I'm in and go check.
Yeah.
This makes it more tempting. My main takeaways from this conversation is I should strongly consider assigning seats and assigning groups, and then probably work on my peer instruction questions by removing the distractors, the wrong answers that are not worth discussing. Always have students discuss, regardless of the percent correct. And the question to have people share out is, what did you discuss? As opposed to like, which do you think is the wrong answer versus the wrong answer and all of that kind of thing. It's just, what did you discuss?
I think that last one is
Mhm.
is a good idea. It's probably not as important as those other ideas. And what I like about your idea of removing distractors, that's a super easy ask for you, right? That's like you can just sit down and do that poof right before you go into the classroom. So yeah, making groups is harder, but and then always having discussion, that's also easier on you too. So those seem very likely to happen.
The science seats, going to think about that. Going to strongly think about it.
Yep, that's definitely a bigger lift.
And then try and I think I like your point about the reflection, and I maybe I'll put it in my even my mid-semester survey. Like I find that students are a little bit more open, willing, and I need to figure out better how to layer back in reminders all over the place. Because to me, the reminders feel repetitive, and so I don't do them. But I know that I need to.
Yes, think of this. This my student worker's younger sister. She's like, she talked about it all the time. I remember she said, but I like it really hit me then. Like there's, beginning of the class, they're all like rah, 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 doing whatever. And like half of the time that you give them a reminder at the beginning of the class, they're seeing it. Half of them aren't because or whatever. So you're getting a 50% or 25% hit rate per day that you have that reminder. And other people don't mind, as much. It's like, I know I'm telling you again, but again, this is so different. And like, I really want you all to understand why it works. And you have to hear about it. You have to experience it. I have to tell you again why it works. You have to experience it some more. It has to be this sort of growing understanding. You show them a spiral, like your understanding of like how to make this work for you and like why it works, et cetera, is a growing spiral.
Yes, the growing spiral. That's true. All right. So let's close out because you've been very generous with your time. I guess for the too long didn't listen, I feel like it's my turn instead of your turn since you're the one that's coaching me. The peer instruction, make sure the question has a minimal number of distractors, only wrong answers that are worth talking about. And then they vote individually. You always have them discuss regardless of how many people got it right on the first try. And then strongly consider doing assigned seats and assigned groups. But I have to go check first if there are seat numbers in my room first. And thank you so much otherwise, though, for hanging out with us, Beth, and helping me out and thinking through how to make things better.
I cannot tell you, like, I've never gotten to do this with anybody. Even all the people I have done peer instruction with over the years. When will you ever have time to make the time to have these sort of discussions to like, what do you do? What do I do? Like, why are you doing those things? I feel like we've missed out an incredible opportunity to help us all. Like, my way is not just always the right way. It has ways in which it might not work in other specific settings. And this has been such an amazing opportunity to have the time to reflect and remind even myself of, why we do the things.
Yeah, well, this is one reason why I started my podcast, because I was like, I want to have these conversations, and then I'll just broadcast it to the world.
Yes, love it.
And thanks to everyone for listening. We'd also like to thank our patrons on Patreon. They help us keep this podcast ad, commercial, and sponsor-free. And a special heartfelt thank you to Clark Schulten, William Turkett, and Glenn Downing, 3 of our patrons that we randomly chose to shout out today. If you are currently not a patron but like what you hear, please consider supporting us on Patreon, link on our website. And if not, at least share the podcast with your colleagues and give us a 5-star rating in your app of choice so the algorithms know to recommend us to more people. And remember, teaching computer science is more than just knowing computer science, and I hope you found something useful for your teaching today.